So in our final session, this is called Can Podcast Advertising Become an Integrated Channel? And with us today, we have Allie Day, who is the Director of Integrated Marketing for HelloFresh, and Liz Horowitz, the founder of Sonic Strategy Consulting. So take it away, ladies.
Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Appreciate you all being here. And before we get into our session, I just wanted to see by a show of hands, who here has used podcast advertising in the past, currently? It looks like, I was gonna say 75%. So that's amazing, because I did this same session last year and I would have said 40%. So a lot of growth in this channel. All right, so we want to hear from HelloFresh about that topic. Wondering if you can tell us, when did HelloFresh begin in podcast advertising, and what can you tell us about that journey?
Yes, so podcast advertising at HelloFresh started long before I joined the company. We were an early adopter in 2016, so that's obviously given us a lot of time to test and learn, and also really grow with the channel. After the podcast boom in 2021, that really opened the floodgates in terms of new creators, more content alignment that synced and resonated with our target audience, as well as endemic alignment and top opportunities. So really it's kind of like the two phases of getting started, and then also when podcasting was blowing up, how did we harness the power of that for our brand and prove it into a growth channel. I work in integrated marketing, so obviously podcast is not the only channel that I cover. So thinking about it now almost as a lot of more like an integration, I would almost call it influencer marketing, the relationship that you have with the podcast host. So that answers a little bit of your question, but I'm happy to go in deeper wherever you'd like.
Oh, sure. Well, so let's talk about that, the integration with the podcast hosts. How does HelloFresh view that, and how do you make a great partnership with those hosts for the best outcome?
Yeah, I think that the key to success there is, how do you partner with hosts that are going to represent your brand in an authentic way and also connect with their audience? So one of the key things that we screen for is trying to find people that have a really engaged audience and are ready to take action. So these are folks that have a relationship with their podcast host. It's not a podcast you sync into once or twice. It's something that you're showing up weekly or monthly or whatever their distribution is. And also being really thoughtful about how we brief our hosts and engage with them. So showing them the product, getting them loving the product and excited to talk to their consumers and their followers, sorry, not their followers, our consumers, about their experience with HelloFresh. We do this through a few tactics. We tap a lot into host-read scripts, which I think is one of the more influencer-led strategies. And we could talk, I keep calling them influencers, even though they're podcasters, but they really are representing your brand.
Absolutely.
And being thoughtful of that is key. So we use some talking points, but don't really put caps or limits on them. There's obviously some things they have to hit. They have to hit the offer, they have to hit any legal T's and C's, and communicate about the product accurately, but allowing them to be more creative with how they talk about it, not putting any time caps on it, really has been integral to creating meaningful relationships with our podcast hosts.
So I know most of what you do is host-read, but I've also heard some that are pre-produced. Can you talk about that a little bit? And what are the results from both of those approaches?
Yeah, I would say we do pre-produce. Our preference is usually host-read, but we do pre-produce when there's an opportunity that we want to insert into more quickly, or a scalable opportunity that allows us to activate something. Let's say there's you see some really strong performance, and we can talk about attribution a little bit, but and we want to scale up really quickly. We'll do a more turnkey format. But when it comes to the more integrated partnerships, we do the host-read scripts, and then we've been testing, some 360 deals, which I think is a really big area of opportunity. If you think about how these folks are filming their podcasts and what channels they're using, it's not just, streaming on Apple or Spotify or some of the other providers, but they're filming it and they're posting it on YouTube, or they're posting about like their interview session with XYZ celebrity on their social channels. So it really is a full experience, and people's relationships with these podcasters are not just through that one channel, but thinking about all the different touch points and what that means, I think could be the future for a lot of these creators. And helps them monetize it as well when they're thinking about how they want to structure their deals and where they're creating those touch points for their advertisers.
So let's talk a little bit more about the integration opportunities that HelloFresh has taken advantage of, and any examples you can give us or directions that you're thinking about going in.
So some examples, we partnered with a few celebrities, B-list celebrities, and show up on their podcast regularly, and we'll have them post. And we also think about long-term deals, right? So it's not just being with them and showing up once, but like how do we enroll them in the program? And it goes back to creating a relationship with your brand. So if they just cook HelloFresh once and talk about it once, that's not as meaningful as talking about it for a few weeks. And we're really looking for customers to stay with us for, more than just one box anyway. So showing how HelloFresh can integrate into their lifestyle is key. And I think also just like the excitement too, like one box doesn't say it all, and people get really proud of using the product, and maybe even, I'm trying to think if they posted a meal. I think they have this influencer that I'm talking about. So it's kind of bridging the gap between audio as a channel and then some of our other influencer marketing avenues as well.
So it's all the different touch points that a particular podcaster / influencer, as you call them, it's the touch points that they're using to connect with their audience, and how HelloFresh can integrate in those non-audio touch points. Is that how the integration works as you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then how are you able to then measure those additional touch points? Is there a deeper partnership that's required in order to get involved in, for example, let's say their newsletter or Substack, or their, mentions on social? There's a cost that comes with that, right? Then how does that then get measured?
Yes, you definitely have to be creative in structuring your deals and thinking about the incentive-based element of a compensation package. Audio as a whole is a challenging channel to measure. It's one of those channels that is, audio first. You don't really have the visual reminder. If you have a business that's based on, voucher code attribution, it's very easy to get lost in the mix. So setting up a system to measure, these types of deals is key, and understanding things like, using MMM, or if you have a first-party study that asks questions like what channels were you exposed to before converting, really kind of closes the loop on the post-purchase experience, and helps create signals to inform our analytics team and build models that accurately represent those channels. And some of the 360 deals, I think why they work so well is because it's the frequency, and then also just like the impact there. So audio is auditory, and then you got the social element of it, which is visual, and I think those two together work really nicely.
That's interesting. So when you're working on a 360 campaign like this, how many touch points are you looking for? Is there a minimum requirement in order to get involved, or do you push the publisher to create something custom?
I think there's no silver bullet. I think it comes down to custom integrations. Some of the tools that we use is we screen the social, see where their fans are most engaged, and then also comparing that where do we see engagement with our product. So for example, if the influencer has, really high TikTok followership, but isn't so strong on Facebook or Instagram, we may not want to pay for that, right? So about prioritization. And then, it comes down to, YouTube too. Like, we don't want to buy into something that, we don't want to force an influencer to do something that's not authentic to their brand. It's more about seeking the opportunity than pushing it.
Okay, so you've mentioned YouTube, socials, newsletters, anything that we're missing?
I think we have it covered.
Okay, what about creative integrations that go beyond those established channels? Like, for example, we haven't talked about this, so I'm throwing this out there. Like a bonus segment that they create around the brand, maybe telling a story that has something to do with their involvement with their relationship with the brand. Is that something you've explored?
I haven't. We haven't done anything like that. It's an interesting concept. I have gotten a few people, my friends send me like some organic mentions and some of the popular female-oriented podcasts of people just talking about HelloFresh by themselves, right? So like that's creating an opportunity, right? Like those are people that are already authentically engaged in loving our product. So picking up on some of those signals is good too, because we have media planning tools, we have agencies and direct relationships and are sourcing all these different deals, right? But like, where are people already using the product, and are we not tapping into them? So that's a really big opportunity as well.
I imagine. So in podcast advertising, I'm estimating you're on hundreds of individual podcasts. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
And you're one of the top spenders in the podcast advertising industry. So I get this question all the time, so I'm going to pose it to you. How do you choose the right podcast? Like, what's your criteria going in? So obviously, you're not choosing just 10 among the millions that are out there.
Yeah.
But you still have your criteria. Is there anything you can share with our audience about that might help them in choosing their next best partnership?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And like, if I was gonna go through the criteria in my head, I think it'd start, brand fit, audience fit, making sure you're choosing folks that are also brand safe too. That's been a big issue recently, or it always has been, just using the right levers. It's also to trust people with your brands, right? And structure deals and contracts, exclusivity, making sure that they're handling, the deal appropriately, and they're not just, advertising farm for podcasts. And then also, I think like a mix of like high scale and low scale is totally okay. It doesn't, we're not, all of our buy is not concentrated in, the top 10% of top podcasts of all time, which are very premium. It's actually, okay to be in the smaller podcasts that are a better fit for your brand, that have that authentic relationship and have quality. And you also have to think about saturation too, right? Like, having a long-term relationship is really great, but if they're pushing it, every single week, you may get some fall off too. So just thinking about your cadence and doing some testing around that, I think can be really helpful.
Can you tell us a little bit more about testing? Because everything you do has to be tested, correct? And so I know that a lot of us have tested podcast advertising and didn't have a great experience, and then have had difficulty selling the channel again up the organization. But the testing process is so unique to every brand. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's challenging with a lot of offline channels and upper funnel channels, which is where I primarily work. Like the chicken or the egg, if you don't spend enough to get a read, you can't sell it in, but there's no confidence, because let's say you started with a really small test. So thinking about like, what are the signals if that will make the most sense for what you're trying to achieve. So whether it's like a local lift test, or perhaps it's partnering first with one of the streaming partners that does offer brand lift studies that you can layer over your buy. I think that's always kind of a great place to start, is like who has the tools, and then go from there. So I think one partner that comes to mind is Spotify. So they have their own sell-side platform, but we also partner directly with podcasters who stream on their platform, right? So we have like a few different levers, and for us, like we're at a point where we have enough spend that it pops in our first party data. So we're not as reliant on that, but I think kind of mapping that out to start, and then really pushing, like if you have an analytics team, to get some spend levels that seem that you'll get like stat sig on to start, versus trying to circle around the platform. But it may not work for everybody, right? Like it could be not a right product fit, or there's not enough space to talk about your product, or maybe you don't have enough brand awareness, or maybe it's not as exciting, right? That to have that kind of only audio representation of your brand. But for us, we found a lot of success, and I think we find people, we get great feedback all the time from podcasters and influencers after they get our product about how much they enjoyed it. So it's really fun to see that enthusiasm come through as well when we partner with them for these types of advertising relationships.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about something that you touched on, which is the bullet points. So creative is a big issue in success, and it's not something that you can know without a lot of testing what is actually going to resonate with the audience. So tell us a little bit about how you would advise on coming up with best practices, what best practices you've leveraged to use for creative.
Yeah. There's definitely some really strong learnings in the e-commerce community and direct-to-consumer on how to structure your creative to get a response. So whether it's leading with your tested brand claims, or what would you put as a headline on your homepage, right? And then how do you communicate that through in a podcast? And then also what's the call to action? What's the offer? What's the hook in? And thinking about it just like you would any other channel. And then also, it's really hard to A/B test in this channel, right? So sometimes using other, integrated channels to inform the creative approach can be helpful. It's always scary trying something new, and whether you're launching a new element of your product line, or whether you're going through a brand positioning, it's obviously something you want to communicate in this medium, but you need to have some proof points probably to build it in with confidence.
Right. So if you have a smaller budget than HelloFresh, and you're doing that initial test and learn, and it isn't going the way you want it to, what would you adjust? Where would you pivot? What are the elements you would look at tweaking first?
Yeah, I think I think one of the things that it's an invaluable tool is also getting feedback from your creators too. So I think that's something that is undervalued in the sense of, okay, this didn't work. Maybe ask your creator, like, why don't you think it worked? Like, why don't you think your audience resonated with this, and gather feedback. Because in the podcast, you can't do that A/B testing, right? So you have to use signals from, maybe your SEA A/B testing, or maybe your paid social, like find your champion creative, and then use that to push in this medium.
All right, Allie, that's terrific. Thank you so much for sharing your success stories about HelloFresh and podcast advertising with us. And I really appreciate you being here today, and appreciate all of you as well.
Thank you.